Hey everyone, this is Dan. We're just going to get started in a minute or two. Just give everyone a couple minutes to join the meeting. If you're in the meeting now, if you could just add sort of who you are and where you're coming from into the chat, that would be super helpful. Thank you. Hi everyone, and welcome to the US Web Design System monthly call for January 2020. This is the first monthly call of 2020, and that's pretty exciting. It was a big year for the web design system last year, and we expect that this will also be a big and exciting year for the web design system. So we're going to try to kick it off in the style here in January. Thanks for being here. Oh, I can say it again with my picture on the screen. Hi, thanks for being here. Today, I think we're going to have a pretty packed day of discussion. I'm going to start it off with some product updates, a little bit of an update on our contact information, and then we'll jump into some guidance and some discussion around using the new design system maturity model that we published at the end of last year. That's still pretty new, and we're all kind of understanding sort of what that means and what it means for our teams and our projects. After that, there'll be some time for some Q&A, and I hope that we can get some questions into the chat and answer them together. I will say that as part of the discussion of using the maturity model, I'm going to do a bit of talking myself, and then I'm going to bring in Jeremy Zeiler from Digital.gov, and we're going to have a little bit of a talk together around how we're thinking about assessing maturity, what we're doing on our own projects, and how we're working to develop more resources for teams that are interested in doing this for themselves. So I may as well just jump right into it and kick it off with some product updates. Well, it's been a really kind of actually pretty tight period between the last monthly call and this monthly call. So there hasn't been a ton of movement in the design system from a code standpoint. And I think we will be releasing USWDS 2.4.1 tomorrow, and that has a couple of useful things in it, mostly small and internal, but we're making some improvements to our Axe Core testing system. We're updating our version of Axe Core from 2.6 to 3.4. This just means we're integrating a few different kinds of tests from some different ways of analyzing in the new Axe Core. So it doesn't change very much from the outside, but it just means that we are using the most up-to-date version of Axe when we're testing site accessibility and component accessibility. We're also fixing a webpack build bug. In 2.4, we introduced a way to display some notifications around news or notifications around things that are new in the new release as part of the build process. But something in that notification broke a SAS loader in webpack, and we're going to just fix that so that folks who load the design system with webpack are able to use the most current version. And we're also adding the most recent version of the Public Sans font, version 1.008, which I think through good luck and kismet, we released that on January 8th. So that felt good, felt lucky. And that version of Public Sans is going to be going into USWDS 2.4.1. And of course, that connects to Public Sans version 1.008 is available now. And as with probably any release that a small release in Public Sans, it's like, what happened in Public Sans? Looks exactly the same as it looked before. But I assure you that the new version of Public Sans has made a couple very useful small tweaks to some of the spacing between characters and to the space character itself that improve the rhythm and readability of the typeface. I've been using it a lot over the last couple of weeks, and I've definitely seen an improvement in how well it displays and how well you can read it. And it's really, it can be really surprising to learn the effects of small changes in a complex system like a typeface. And I'm always learning as we see changes to this face, what seemingly very small things can do to the overall feeling and presentation of the face. So if we look at this screenshot here, this is essentially like an overlay of Public Sans version 1 with Public Sans version 1.008. Like, you might be hard pressed to discern a lot of differences between them. Yeah, the H is a little narrower. There's some other differences in spacing, but it's hard to really say. Even when you zoom in, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, maybe the shape of the F changed a little bit. The R is a little bit wider now. Like the shape of the dot on top of the I has changed a bit from version 1 in blue and in version 8 in red. And yeah, it's a really unusual thing how the very small changes can sometimes make a big, if sort of unconscious difference in the perception of readability for the typeface. So that's all a long way of saying that Public Sans 1.008 is out and available, and I think that it's a good improvement and one that folks should download and replace any old version of Public Sans. We've updated the visual design assets so that includes the most recent version of the font, and it also makes sure that face is used appropriately in those visual design assets. And that's it for product. The other kind of sort of housekeeping update this month is that we're updating our contact information. Specifically, we're updating our email address. And that USWDS at GSA.gov is sort of moving into its retirement phase. And now we're using USWDS at support.digitalgov.gov, which, yes, we know, it is a mouthful and it is harder to say. The important thing about this email address is that it fully connects now to a better ticketing backend. So update those. We've updated that on our website. We've updated it in our GitHub. You can just update it in your contact address book, USWDS at support.digitalgov.gov. And this is really, it helps us connect to a better ticketing system, which is going to result in sort of better, faster communication between the team and folks who are writing in. So I hope that this means that we'll have fewer emails that fall between the cracks, that we're able to respond to emails faster, that we're able to just address emails a lot better. Even if the address is a little bit uglier, everything else is going to be that much nicer. And the old address also will still work. We'll just reply from the new address. So if you send an email to USWDS@gsa.gov and you get something back from this new longer address, don't be surprised. That is just the new system working as intended. So that's it for product updates and for housekeeping updates. And the rest of this time, we're going to just spend looking again at the design system maturity model that we introduced at the end of 2019, last month, and talk a little bit about using the maturity model, how it's intended to be used, how it can best be used, how to assess your usage of it. And in a way, like, to think about using the maturity model is to think about kind of asking questions. It's like the maturity model sort of answers the question, like, how do I use the design system? It helps answer the question, how do I know if we as a team are moving in the right direction with our design and development? And it answers the question, how do I explain our decisions and our decision making to stakeholders? If we say we did this thing and not another thing, what is our reasoning? Why did we do this? What is important to context to explain in your decision making? And in general, it helps answer the question for teams of, like, how do I help build a great digital experience? And the maturity model is built to sort of address both sort of small questions, the nitty-gritty questions, but also the big questions as well. It's meant to help teams think about how to implement this or that color, but it's also meant to say, should we move in this direction or in that direction? Where should we spend our resources most appropriately? It's meant to help make that decision easier. In general, it's all about, how do I make good decisions? And when we're thinking about maturity and we're thinking about design principles, when we're talking about guidance, when we're thinking about code, the maturity model says that all of these aspects should be considered making decisions, that you're thinking about when you're doing things and when you're planning for new things. It could be seen as a lot of check boxes. It could be seen as, like looking through conformance with Section 508. Like, there are specific check boxes to check. And there are things that are indicators of design system maturity. There are things that are indicators of using the design principles that could be seen as checkboxes. But in general, thinking about maturity and thinking about using the design principles and following the USWDS guidance and using the design system code is really about more than checking boxes. In a way, sometimes checking boxes is a good way to stay on track and a good way to know that you're doing the things that you expect to be doing. But in a way, checking boxes can be like looking backwards. And the design system maturity model is sort of meant to be a way to help teams look forward as well. And that's generally how I like to think about design system maturity. That design system maturity can be seen as like how well teams can look forward and how well teams can make new decisions based on the guidance that the design system gives. And sort of thinking about maturity and thinking about where you might be at a maturity stage, there are some sort of common ways of thinking about stages of maturity. And this 5-stage model is kind of a pretty regular way of thinking about it. These 5 stages that I have here are beginner, learner, builder, integrator, and leader. And if we think about, in a very broad way, if we think about design system maturity as how well teams can look forward using the design system, the beginner stage is kind of like unpredictable. Like they're not familiar with the design system, they're not familiar with with its guidance, they're not familiar with its principles. Can it look forward well? It's kind of like unpredictable. Like you don't know. Like that's part of the good and the bad of the beginner's mind. That the beginner doesn't really know how to use something at all. They might have great insights, or they might just be off in the wrong direction altogether. Beginner is just where you start when you're coming to something brand new. The second stage you might think of as being a learner, where you're learning about a topic, you're learning about the design system, you're learning about a design principle. You're sort of more reactive, like you're learning about it and you're looking back to see whether or not these are things that you do. How well am I doing these things? What do I know about it? Is a sort of is a learner stage activity. The builder stage, you begin to be a little bit more proactive. You're still looking back and you're sort of assessing. In a way, that's part of every stage, but you're really beginning to look forward. You begin to understand some of the rules. You begin to understand some of the considerations, and you're able to plan for new things. You're able to see opportunities for improvement. The integrator stage is looking forward even more. It's beginning to sort of operationalize these rules and these considerations. It's beginning to say, okay, like we have this sort of design principle, we have done these activities, how is it built into our decision making? When we begin to build this, all of the design system into our decision making, at an organizational level, then we really think of this as more of the integrator level of maturity. And then beyond that is really like a leader level or a leadership level with maturity. Thinking about you not only you exist in this level of maturity so well that you can sort of do new things with it. You can optimize it. You can ask better questions of it. You can improve it. You can teach others how to use it better. So I like to think of these when I'm thinking about maturity, and I'm thinking about how well I'm doing something as a practitioner, or how well my team is doing something as a team, or how well my product is doing something as a product. I like to think of it through this sort of 5-step frame. Am I a beginner? Am I a learner? Am I a builder? Am I an integrator or a leader? And you know, for all of us here, like our maturity model and the USWDS design principles are a relatively new concept. The design principles are newly USWDS principles. They are common. I think they are not surprising, and there are things that a lot of teams are already doing and doing well. But seeing them in the context of the design system and seeing them packaged sort of in the way we package them, this is new. And we all need to better our level of maturity using design principles. This is something that's a ongoing process, and this is something that is a sort of maturity doesn't really stop. We're all kind of learning about the design principles right now. We're all beginning to assess where we might fall in a maturity level in implementing them, and we're all looking to see how we might do this better. In general, we're trying to take a look at like how well these are integrated into our skills and our skill sets on our team, into our process, and into our product in general. So looking at the maturity model, we've seen these three circles before. We can think of the stages of maturity in the maturity model as kinds of questions. At the most granular code level, it's like the question is what? Like, what are we building? What is the code that's there? What color is it? What's the type size? Like, what is the functionality? And the guidance level helps to say, like, how are we building it? We're building it so that we're building it in a specific way so that it is more usable, so that it meets sort of expectations. But I think the important thing that we want to introduce here and add to everything is the largest, like, principle layer, and that principles layer begins to ask, like, why are we building this thing at all? Like, why are we doing what we're doing? What's important to us? And what can help us make good decisions for a team? Asking the right why questions. And the design principles are designed to help teams ask why questions around their product. And that's why they're the foundational outside first layer of design system maturity, is beginning to understand what the principles are, what they imply, and the sort of questions you ask in service of them, the actions you need to take in service of them, the skills that you need to develop in service of them. They frame the kind of why questions that a team answers, and they help a team understand if the answer they've built is a good one. And, a sort of pithy way of thinking about it is, if we don't start with why, then we won't know what's what. Like, we can't start at the code level. We have to start at the principles layer and think about what we're doing at that broad level. Otherwise, we're just gonna work willy-nilly, and we'll backfill reasoning on after it, and eventually everyone will be sad. So a way to think about to assess a level of maturity with the design system is just to think about the decisions that your team makes. How does this decision address the principles? How does this decision address starting with user needs? How does it earn trust? How does this decision address embracing accessibility, promoting continuity, listening? How does this decision address integrating user experience guidance? How does this decision address using the code and the design language of the design system? And this is something you can ask, not only of an individual decision, but these are the kinds of questions that teams need to be asking themselves about the team itself. Like, how does our team address these kinds of ideas? How does our team address earning trust? And also, how does our process address earning trust? What are we able to do as individuals? What are we building into the way that we work? And then what is the outcome? Then how does our product address starting with user needs? How does our product address promoting continuity? How does our product address using the design system design language? So if we can look at it through just one sort of narrow lens here of, like, design language, or how well are we using the design system code maturity levels. At the beginner level, you're like, I don't understand or use the design language or the design system code at all. At the learner level, you're like learning about the design language and tokens and code. At the builder level, you're beginning to use these things. You can identify areas for improving them. You can add new things, and you can figure out how to improve. At the integrator level, you are integrating the code and the design tokens and those things into your decision making. It's part of thinking about how you're going to add something new, or why you would add something new. And at the sort of leadership level, you're able to really teach and like innovate, like in the use of like design tokens or in the use of code. You're able to build new things with design system code. You're able to submit that code back into the design system, is beginning to do things that are at the integrator or leadership stage of maturity when you're looking at code. So when you're thinking about maturity assessment, it's always through those lenses of principles and guidance and code. You'll need to talk to your team to understand the maturity of your team's skill sets when it comes to following the design principles. You'll need to talk to your team to understand the maturity of your process and decision making when it comes to integrating them into things that you do. And you'll have to talk to your team to understand the maturity of your product and your output. Because all of those things, I think, are somewhat distinct. There can be different configurations of skill set, process, and product. For instance, you might be starting with something like a new team, like a new highly capable team that doesn't have a lot of product right now. The product might be relatively immature when it comes to the way it expresses design principles and code. But the team's skill set might be very mature, and it might work toward improving both its process and its product. Or you might have something that's sort of on the opposite side, something that's in more of an operations and management phase, where the product might be relatively mature and static, but the team's skill sets are no longer always able to be fully mature in following design principles in the service of that product. If you wanted to, say, make some security updates to this product, like maybe your team doesn't have that sort of skill anymore, or if you maybe your team lacks the skills now to do a proper accessibility audit of the existing product. As the accessibility landscape changes, you may find that your product is less accessible than it was before. If you have a mature product, but a relatively immature team, it's good to know where you are so you can begin to ask for what you need. So, and that sort of leads into, like, you'll need to talk to your team to improve these things. To understand where you are is to begin to understand what you can do next and what you might need to get there. So what you might learn in the assessment process is to get a snapshot of what you've done. How well are we doing these things? Like, when we look back, can we check off some boxes? Like, if we look at the design principles on the USWDS website, there are a lot of indicators there. There are questions you can ask of your team, and there are practical actions that you can do. Like, the snapshot might say, how well are we able to answer these questions? And what have we done? You'll learn your maturity, like, just how are we doing? Not just looking back, but like, how are we doing as a team in thinking about these things and embodying these things in our day-to-day work. And you might also learn action items, like, what can we do next? How could we do something new in our from the context of our team, from our process or our product, to better start from real user needs, or to better embrace accessibility, or to better earn trust. As you learn about things, as you better learn the kinds of activities that are involved in these principles, you can not just do the things that are there as checkmarked items, but you can understand what you might need to do that is specific to your project that might not be on that list. And I think the important thing is that we're all just kind of getting started with this and thinking about how the design principles, how the idea of design system maturity relates to our project and our team. this is really just the start of this discussion. And we really, need to continue to like get your feedback and to hear your pain points in where things are hard to understand, where you need more examples, like where it's helpful to talk about this thing or another thing. What practical actions, what activities can we develop to help teams really think through the design principles and design system maturity? And we are thinking about this. So coming soon, we have been working on the first sort of like a beta phase of a maturity assessment worksheet, a worksheet that kind of goes through what's important about thinking about design system maturity, a lot of the things I've talked about here, but then also starts for really the beginner and the learner phase of like, how do we understand what we're already doing that is consistent with design system maturity and the design principles. And so we're working on that and hope to have that released really soon. Essentially, that's a PDF with some activities and some checklists. We're also working on getting some more resources related to design system maturity and design principles up on Digital.gov, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. And the design system itself is a product. Like, we're a product with a team and a process, and we do this ourselves. Like at USWDS, we'll also be thinking about assessment and thinking about maturity and thinking about the design principles when we're looking at how we are as a product, and when we're thinking about what we need to do in 2020 to be better and a more mature consumer of the design system. So we're going to be opening a few issues in GitHub that are will be specifically around looking at the design principles. Of each principle have that opens up a discussion around what we're doing and what we could be doing better as a product in pursuance of that principle. We'll be opening those up in GitHub soon, and I'll be posting those into USWDS Public, and I hope to get some of your eyes on what we're doing to not only help us figure out how we can do it and do it better, but how we can take what we've done and turn that into something that can help other people do this as well. So keep your eyes open to the USWDS public channel because these things are going to be coming soon, and the public channel is where we'll be posting them first. So this sort of opens a lot of questions around next steps and what the design system is doing and what others are doing to think about maturity and to talk about thinking about it better. That's a very awkward sentence, but hopefully someone who can talk about this with me in a way that is slightly less awkward than I can is Jeremy Zeiler, who is the director of Digital.gov. And I know that he is currently working on some resources on Digital.gov that will help teams think about design system maturity and think about design principles. And I wanted to ask him a little bit about his thinking when it came to developing those resources, and I will add a little bit of what we're doing as well. So, Jeremy, are you here on this call?
Hello, yes.
Hey there, Jeremy.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, totally. I am going to stop sharing my screen for a moment so I can get the full view of my face. But when you were thinking about developing resources around the ideas of maturity and design principles, what were the first questions you were asking yourself? What did you learn about what you really needed to understand for yourself about these ideas.
So I've spent a lot of time just going through basically the links on the design system page about the maturity model, reading it, doing a lot of reading about how other people understand maturity models, basically to start to answer the question like, what is a maturity model and how do we explain that? Because it's a concept that is frankly new to me. And when I started exploring it, I realized, oh, I actually encounter these things in a lot of different places in my life. I encounter them to some degree in like annual performance review type stuff. You're strong in this area, you're not as strong in this area type of stuff. Encounter it with around like my kids' school and how they're graded. And it's not necessarily about, did you do this or did you do that? It's just like, here's some areas where we should focus and we should actually apply more resources, apply more energy and focus so that improves over time.
And I think that, I mean, from my perspective, not to totally interrupt, but that's what I hope is maybe part of the takeaway for a lot of thinking here, is that it's really around like improving over time, like that the idea of maturity is dynamic, that it's something that you're not stamped with a maturity level that you are then at that maturity level forever and you're stuck there. The whole point of looking at it is not to give yourself like a maturity stamp, but rather to understand like what actions you can now take, like where do you go from here?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the other thing I really understood about how you've been starting to put together this maturity model thing, is that it's really that the design system is the maturity model, that actually everything included in there is roughly organized into one of those three tiers, either into principles, guidance, or code. And it's a way of reading and actually moving through the guidance. And that was kind of an important realization, I think, for me, so that we can start to map it up with guidance that we have in Digitalgov, or how do we, so that people at each different level, like how can we utilize resources that we have in existence on Digitalgov or the communities to better support moving through the maturity model.
Yeah, the maturity model is, I think, as you say, just like a conceptual map of the design system. Like this is what the design system is a collection of principles, guidance, and code that help teams make decisions and build new things.
The other thing that as I'm going through just making sure we're doing due diligence on explaining this stuff, is just making sure that we're also pointing to the right things that explains what a design system is and the role of the design system. I came personally as a web developer, web designer, came into design systems through code, but then learned that no, they're actually much more than that. They are like a living, breathing style guide. They are that's constantly responding and adapting, that they're things that management uses to better kind of control design at scale, which is kind of wild. So as opposed to going to some design agency or branding agency and they give you a style guide and some binder and that's the law for, there, like it's just not, it's not feasible these days to have, when you have like a marketing team and various different communication teams and apps and stuff, to understand, well, how do we behave? How do we talk to users? What are our mission goals and priorities here? And the design system and the principles that you have in your organization help to guide those teams so that they can operate more independently and everybody can sort of move in the same direction, in the same way that like a flock of birds takes off and moves all in like one unison. So,
yeah, I always like to think of it as you know, maybe it's totally obvious from all of the things that I just talked about in the last half an hour, but that design systems are at their heart, like around looking forward. They're not about like always just like capturing a fixed set of requirements that you developed and then just like left there. They're about like, how do you build new things and how do you adapt a designed language to a new situation?
yeah, and you actually had a slide a little bit ago that I thought was where you said, you know, something along the lines like, how are we helping people make good decisions, or how to make good decisions? And I find that that's an interesting concept. It's something I often don't have front and center as I'm thinking about, we should fix this, we should change the way this functions. It's usually technical. I'm thinking this button needs to be there, this thing needs to happen. And if, you know, it makes me want to step back and just make sure, like, how am I making these decisions? How am I connecting with this? Does this thing need to happen? Will it enable people to do something, and what will enable them to do better, faster, with more clarity, and bring that language into just at least how, like, I propose making a change, or how, and the reasons for the change, or how we test whether that change was successful or not. So
And then hopefully the next steps with that, once you understand sort of why you want to make a change and what might make that change successful, you can then say, all right, well then how will I build it with the tools that I have? Like then you're like, okay, I have this set of components, I have this set of utilities, I have these palettes. Like then you're able to step into the kind of nuts and bolts and develop that new solution. I hope that's the.
Well, and if somebody's asking you to give them a little bit more concrete example, if you have a small site and somebody's asking you to integrate with a search engine or build in search on your site, and you don't have an engineer, right? You actually can step back and say, well, what's the need for search on the site? Well, there's a lot of things that we need people to be able to find. You may have access to the content files and the way things are organized, and maybe there's a way that in that interim that you could solve that with what you do have access to, and that you're not solving the requirement to put search on your site, you're actually solving the requirement to make certain elements or resources more findable on your site. So which changes the shape of the priorities and how you think about problem definition. So I just think that's really powerful. And I also think it's a concept that I'd like to find a way to put a little bit more front and center, because, but I also want to hear from people in the community who are looking at this and wondering, well, what does this mean for me? And see that that's also a problem for them before.
Yeah. I would also hope that that as we move forward, thinking about maturity and the lens of design principles, that I sort of alluded to it in the presentation, but I would hope that is a good lens for making your case, not just for the development of your own product, but to make your case to others that might be able to help you out. That you're like, hey, we need this kind of support. We don't need it necessarily because we have to do this one technical thing, that we might have to do this one technical thing. We have to do it because we're weak in supporting this kind of design principle and supporting this idea. Like we cannot adequately embrace accessibility with the tools that we have. And that begins to give hopefully a useful frame for making an argument or making a request or helping to coordinate activities among multiple teams because they share that same principle, and they might be able to find a solution together.
It also, I just would like to say, it also occurred to me to use the like personal finance kind of term of like, if you just look at your spending and see what your look at your spending that you've done, and it'll be a good reflection of your priorities. And in some ways, you know, you could sort of apply that to look at all the edits that you've made to your website over, let's say, the last 3 months, whether they're content edits or technical functional edits, and maybe map them up against the design principles and see if you can create a picture of, well, what are the priorities or what have been the priorities, and then how those might shift.
Yeah, that kind of leads into, I know that I saw that that was an activity that you were working on sort of developing for some of your own guidance. And I think you might have had maybe another one, but yeah, I think there are methods and there are activities that teams can take that can help them understand better what they're already doing, and to help them understand better the shape of their own team in the context of principles and design system maturity, and doing that kind of sort of edit audit of like action audit. What have we done over the last 2 months? Like how do these fit into these buckets is one angle. And I think you had another activity that maybe kind of approached it from possibly the opposite angle.
Yeah, just in terms of like drafting, like what are activities, and frankly, like as I'm looking through the design system and the maturity model and asking questions around like, well, how would we as a team, as the Digitalgov team, like start to assess this ourselves, and what type of things might be needed? It's just like, well, maybe we should do an activity where we read over the design principles with the team, and then everyone notes which ones resonate most with the team and why. And then maybe we list out decisions that we've recently made or actions and that fall under the design principles, and talk about areas where we're not. So, because I can tell you that as soon as I take that maturity assessment, there's areas that I know where I'm going to be weak at, and I'm really interested in seeing that, so that we can bring that up and as a team and look at, well, how do we support that better? Like, what actions should we be doing? And frankly, we have a lot of the guidance and the actions already on Digitalgov or around government about how to do those things. So should just be prioritizing that with our time.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that, you know, when we're thinking about these things, when we're looking at our own maturity, and when we're looking at our own way that we're understanding and integrating design principles, like this isn't, it's not a test, you know, like you're not, I don't think teams should think of these things as like a grade. I understand that that there might be a way of thinking of it as a grade, but I think it's more useful to just understand where you are, not as a, because you can't think of it as a grade exactly, because there's no high limit and there's no low limit. There's no top and there's no bottom. There's only a way that you move through the space. So the important thing is knowing sort of like where you are, understanding the context better, and learning how to make, and learning to incorporate the principles and the idea of maturity into subsequent decisions, and to understand those principles better by knowing what you've already done that are coherent with them. And the more you do it, the more you understand it, the more it will just be sort of internalized, and you'll be able to plan. You'll be able to become more moving into a builder, moving into an integrator. And you know, those words are just words, but I think they're useful ways of just capturing that idea more than more than something that I feel is really, that could be harsh, like a grade or a number of stars or something. So I hear that there's 10 minutes left, and that 10 minutes left means that I should take a look at the chat and make sure that we are looking at some of the questions that have come in and addressing what I see. So I'm going to start to go back into the chat and to look at the questions that are in there, and I'll start to answer them as best as I can. If you have new questions, add them to the chat, and I'll get to them as I scroll down. All right. Bruce Bailey is waiting for the I in public sans to have a dot, like Helvetica. I don't know if Helvetica has a dot, but instead of a square. I will say that it is something that that I have looked at, though I've got to say when it turns into a dot, it loses a little bit of like gravitas. I don't know, just one person's opinion, but it's definitely something that we've looked at. John Alexander asks, with these with the 18F methods and with some of the more focus on usability, design principles, etc., in Digital.gov, like, is there any plan to consolidate usability.gov? To which Jeremy says there's more to come on that. So I will stay put for the news that's to come on that, because I do think that usability.gov is like, there's gold in them Czar hills, but you know, the mines are a little broken down. Like there's like a cow skull outside of it or something, but there's still a rich vein in there. John asks, there are 3 pages dedicated to color in the design system. Can there be just one reference for color? Could be. I think you know, we're trying to do a couple things in the color section, and color is one of the more complicated and in-depth visual design aspects of the design system, and I think it's important in the world of color to be able to explain some general guidance around color, and to be able to talk about how we developed the palette that we did and why it exists in the way it exists. And then I think there's a distinction between the way you use color in a specific project and the colors that are available to the entire design system. So I think that there are 3 distinct aspects to color when it comes to using the design system. Could they be better integrated? Could there be one canonical source? Possible. It would be a very long page. Interesting. David asks, can you share the Digital.gov time machine that lets you make updates in the future? Because Digital.gov was last updated at 6:49 p.m. Eastern time. So if you're able to share that, Jeremy, you can. That might be close hold.
Something that we're working on open sourcing, so others can do that as well.
Until then, check out, what is it, time.gov, Jeremy? That's our canonical source for time-related matters.
Time.gov is one of the best government websites out there. So,
its design system maturity level is probably beginner to learner stage. But yeah, I would say please keep your eyes peeled in USWDS Public. If you don't already follow Digital.gov on Twitter, Digital.gov will be able to share out some of these things as they develop them. And they are a much more reliable Twitter resource than the US Web Design System. So as we work through these questions, we will want to reach out to the community to take a look at what we're doing and to let us know how we can improve what we're doing, because it is important, and we're all sort of learning these things together. And that is all I had to talk about, and I'm happy to end 5 minutes early, unless Jeremy, you have anything else you'd like to add at the end?
No, I think I'm good as well.
I appreciate you coming today, and I appreciate everything that Digital.gov is able to do in coordination with the design system to help us, like, expand our reach and to answer questions in a really sort of user-focused way. The perspective that Digital.gov brings to the design system is a really important one, and I'm happy that you're able to think through these problems with us.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all for coming by today. Happy January. It's good to start this really amazingly named year of 2020. We'll see how it goes. Take care, everyone.